We're slightly late this evening, but the Manifesto, Labour's vision for socialism in 21st century Britain, was right on time. Today, obviously, the Labour Manifesto was released. It's time for real change was its title. But what has changed since 2017? What are the biggest offers Labour are making? And will this provide the rocket boosters Labour's campaign, at this point, genuinely really does need? It did do in 2017. Will it do the same today? On tonight's Titski Sour, I'm joined by Aaron Bastani to talk about the new Labour Manifesto.
What's up? How you doing, Michael?
I am very well. Did you enjoy the launch today?
It was a great launch. I think Labour have had a brilliant 72 hours. I think they needed it, like you say. So there's only 3 weeks to go. Well, almost 4 weeks, 3.5 weeks to go. And they've got it. They've started to produce the goods and you can now feel momentum. And I thought today couldn't have gone much better, to be honest.
What else happened? So the 72 hours, what are you including in that?
The debate.
The debate?
I think the debate, the aftermath of the debate, the shit show of the Tories doing that sort of fake Twitter account, Fact Check UK, the fact that Boris Johnson's pulled out of a Channel 4 debate, the fact that Tories just look really on the back foot defending the behaviour of their party. Another fake news story today. We can maybe talk about that later with regards to them setting up a... It may actually be electorally fraudulent, this fake website which is saying Labour Manifesto. And I just think that Labour has really successfully steered it onto the areas they want to steer it onto. And also, I suppose the icing on the cake was that for the first time, the NHS polled above Brexit as the major issue of this election. So overall, it's been a really good 72 hours, yeah.
We're going to talk about the contents of the manifesto in a moment. But first of all, let's take a look at the launch. So this is Jeremy Corbyn introducing Labour's new manifesto. We can go to that now.
Labour's manifesto is a manifesto for hope. That is what this document is. A manifesto that will bring real change. A manifesto that's full of popular policies that the political establishment has blocked for a generation. But you can't have it. At least that's what the most powerful people in Britain and their supporters want you to believe. Over the next 3 weeks, they're going to tell you that everything in this manifesto is impossible, that it's too much for you, because they do not want real change in this country. Why would they? The system is working just fine for them. It's rigged in their favour. But it's not working for you.
So Corbyn introduced the manifesto there. With the kind of, I suppose you could call it populist vigour that you saw in 2017. He says elsewhere in the speech, bankers, billionaires and the establishment are wanting to thwart Labour's plans. He also added, they don't own the Labour Party. This is the establishment. The people own the Labour Party, which was particularly apt today. I don't know if they knew these figures were going to come out, but we can go to a tweet from Theo Usherwood, who's shown the parties have just had to release the amount of money they have received in donations since the start of the election, or at least, and this is significant, they have received in donations above £7,500 per person. So it is £5.6 million for the Tories, and only £200,000 for the Labour Party. So Theo Usherwood, who's the political editor at LBC. I read his tweet as saying that the Labour Party weren't doing particularly well when it came to fundraising. He's saying that for every pound Labour made, the Conservatives made £25. In fact, that's fairly misleading because Labour have been pretty decent at fundraising. Actually, it just wouldn't have appeared in these particular accounts because all of Labour's money, or all but £200,000 of Labour's money, comes from small donations. So in the first week of the campaign, Labour made £1 million with an average donation of £26. And we can see that Conservatives are in a very different situation. £5.6 million, all from people donating over 7k. Let's look at some of the key policies in the manifesto. I think we can probably bring these up on the screen now as well. So £75 billion to build 150 new council and social homes a year within 5 years. And we know that 100,000 of those are going to be council homes. An immediate 5% pay rise for public sector workers with year-on-year above inflation pay rises to follow.
That's next spring, right? That would happen?
Yeah, and that's significant because public sector pay workers have been subject to a pay freeze or a cap of 1% increases in their wages in nominal terms, which means that in real terms their wages have been falling for quite a while. Introducing a real living wage of at least £10 an hour, we knew that already. Reviewing the retirement age for people in hard manual jobs. Introducing a second homes tax, I really like this one. Reversing inheritance tax cuts and imposing VAT on private school fees. So a slight watering down of the abolish private schools motion that went through into Labour Party conference, but nonetheless a nice combative and common sense policy there. Giving EU nationals living in the UK the automatic right to stay. So I suppose that means they won't have to go through the somewhat long-winded processes at the moment that it takes for you to get residency rights. Reinstating 3,000 bus routes that have been cut. Free broadband for all delivered by part nationalising BT. We spoke about that on Friday with John McDonnell. A £3 billion plan to offer adults in England free access to retraining. A pledge to reduce all primary school classes to fewer than 30 children. You can't argue with that. Free personal at-home care in England for over 65s and those most in need of it. And a pledge to renew the Trident nuclear deterrent and spend at least 2% of GDP on defence. Some people won't be particularly happy with that, but I think there's no surprises there. And reducing the voting age to 16, which could be politically very, very significant if it were to be implemented. But again, that's not a surprise. We knew that was going to be in the Labour Party manifesto. Aaron, you've had a read of the manifesto now. What were the bits that jumped out at you? Any surprises? What do you think is going to be most significant, both electorally in terms of the contest we are in the middle of, and if Labour were to enter government?
Yeah, so I think you've obviously talked about some of the really important stuff. A few other ones that really caught my eye. One was free buses for under 25s. For bus companies that are taken into public ownership or public control by local councils.
And they're going to make it easier for local councils to take bus companies into public control.
A bit like the Freedom Pass for the over 60s or over 65s, depending on where you are. And I think that's a great way of rolling out free bus travel for everyone, which should be an ambition for the left in the next decade. You can do it incrementally, 25, 35, 65, right now to 55, and gradually it just encompasses everybody. Why would you want to do that? Because free electric buses reduces the 30,000 people dying from dirty air pollution every year, obviously helps regarding climate change and meeting climate change targets, and it's a great way of reviving high streets, combating social exclusion, people who are subject to income deprivation, etc. But the really big one was climate change, which you've not really mentioned. So 250 billion would be given to a kind of green transition fund, 250 billion pounds. We would move to 90% of electricity coming from renewables by 2030. That will include cars because there'll be no more petrol cars for sale after 2030. Presently, it's 2040 with the Tories. That would be 2030 with Labour.
They'd still exist, right? So there'd still be people using petrol-powered cars on the roads, but there'd be no one purchasing a new petrol-powered car.
What that would do is accelerate, obviously, the infrastructure that electric cars are going to need. And also, I wonder how it would work with regards to selling parts for electric vehicles and servicing and maintaining electric vehicles, but separate conversation. But notwithstanding that, the electricity target's a big one because it includes vehicles to a significant extent. We're going to see a lot more electric vehicles and obviously retrofitting because a lot of energy in this country is actually used for heating because it's a cold country. We have long winters with not much sunlight. So that was all really good. And also a commitment to nuclear. There was a commitment to nuclear being a part of the energy mix. Why? Because if we're serious about rapid decarbonisation, they're now saying in the 2030s rather than 2030, or they're looking at these numbers, it looks to me like you'd see a 85% reduction of CO2 emissions by 2030 with these measures. If we're serious about doing that in rapid time, and because of what's called intermittency, which is to say that you have a long winter, not much solar, you might not have particularly windy days, and of course you have issues around sufficient energy coming from wind, from solar to power, 10 million plus households, a country of 65 million people. And that's true. Ultimately, I think we won't need nuclear as part of our energy mix. I've talked about that in the book, Fully Automated Luxury Communism. Why? Because nuclear is cost inflationary. It's not really getting cheaper. Wind and solar are getting constantly cheaper. But in the next 10, 15, 20 years, we're going to have nuclear. And so I think it's been, a lot of people say, oh, this is, utopian, far-fetched, but actually when you look at their sort of energy policy around decarbonisation, it's very pragmatic, far more pragmatic than the Greens, right? Because the reality is if you want to decarbonise in the next 15 years, we're going to have some nuclear in the mix. And I hate nuclear. So it showed to me, and this was the big difference to 2017, 2017 was a fantastic manifesto, was a Green manifesto, but this is the first manifesto by a major British political party where climate change is not just a central issue, but it runs through all the other issues as well. When you're thinking about schooling, when you're thinking about public transport, housing, there is a climate focus, a green focus around every other issue too.
I mean, that shows actually, I think that shows more what has changed in international politics and politics generally than what has changed within the Labour Party, because I do think that push to having climate change centre stage at every single part of the manifesto was due to the climate strikes, was due to Greta Thunberg, was due to Extinction Rebellion, and was due to Labour for a Green New Deal and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, that is significant, and to be honest, because it's become political common sense now, it's less striking than it would have been if they'd have put these proposals forward in 2017. I think more than any of the other ones that have entered newly in the 2019 manifesto. So free broadband, I could imagine that being in the 2017 manifesto, but I couldn't imagine zero carbon or getting quite a long way towards net zero by 2030. I want to talk about housing in a moment, because that's one of the things that really stood out to me. But while we're on climate change, actually, how worried are you, or do you think it's significant that the climate change target has potentially been watered down? So many people at Labour Party conference were excited and claiming victory for the Labour for a Green New Deal campaign, because Labour, they thought, had committed to net zero by 2030.
Yeah.
It turns out that actually, that's very much now a soft ambition, and we're saying we're going to have taken considerable steps towards net zero by 2030. Should people be disappointed?
No, I mean, there still may be net zero by 2030, because a big part of net zero is not just changing what the energy mix looks like. It's not just about, moving from fossil fuels to renewables. It's also about the extent to which we can roll out retrofitting, the extent to which, there was a concrete target in the manifesto of zero carbon agriculture by 2040, which is actually really ambitious, which is often not included in these conversations, right? Because obviously agriculture is a huge sink for resources, land, fresh water. We use more fresh water for animals that we eat than we drink ourselves. We grow more crops for the animals we eat than we grow for ourselves. So that was a huge thing, actually, which wasn't in the conference, kind of in the ambit of the conference discussion a few months ago. So I don't think so at all. I think it's a really, really brave set of objectives. Is it decarbonisation by 2030? No, it's about, I would say, 85, 90%. Realistically, you're not going to decarbonise by 2030 because there are so many little areas which you would need to address. I think agriculture ultimately isn't even being included in these conversations. Decarbonising the energy mix by 2030 was always a big stretch goal for me, and I think I've always said 2035 actually. So I was kind of shocked it got passed in the conference. But look, 2030 would be 2 parliamentary terms away. So I think that would still be a possible objective. And I don't think this is watering it down. I just think it's offering a clear roadmap how to get there. Are they doing that because they're being sort of a bit, tight with resources? No. They're committing £250 billion. There's a lot of money. So I think we have to be a bit more sensible about this. And the sort of reaction that really frustrated me was that of the Green Party. This is clearly the most radical agenda for climate transition you're going to see from any major political party in Western Europe or North America. And the Greens were attacking it, quoting an article by The Independent, which was factually incorrect. This is a paper owned by a billionaire, the Lebedevs, right? We don't know if it's Alexander or Yevgeny Lebedev, to attack an eco-socialist manifesto. And I actually thought they were really pathetic for doing that. And apart from Caroline Lucas, I hope all of their candidates lose their deposits.
Oh, lose their deposits?
I thought
you were going to say lose the seats, which is, they normally do, other than Caroline Lucas.
If you're a Green, and some of them call themselves eco-socialists, I find it bizarre to denigrate and attack that manifesto. And then they say, well, look, we've made the Labour Party move left. We've made it move onto this green terrain. Bullshit. The reason why Labour has adopted those policies is because of a fight inside the party, right? the reason why you've got Labour 2 years ago saying, yeah, we'll have a third runway at Heathrow and, it's job creation, all of a sudden now it's talking about, well, we actually really need to transition.
I mean, it wasn't actually because of, it wasn't because of electoral competition. So when you have an outrider party or a smaller party and a major party takes it on, that is because, they want to get their voters. And I don't think Labour have been threatened by the Greens on the terms
That's
of
how they view
climate change
themselves
for a while.
They think, Labour's moved left because we're this outrider party, and if you elect a few Green MPs, we'll keep a Labour government honest. And the reality is, the only thing that's going to keep a Labour government honest is a democratically mobilised membership. And I think, that's sort of for the birds, the idea that they would keep a Labour government honest to the left and sincere about addressing climate change.
So the precise words used in the manifesto is Labour is promising to achieve the substantial majority of our emissions reductions by 2030 in a way that is evidence-based. I mean, for me, that evidence-based thing is quite key, because I remember when the 2030 motion first got passed at conference, I was looking at how, if you're going on media appearances or whatever, when you're going to have you're going to have a row with someone, so you know that someone is going to be sort of really pushing you to the limit to justify that particular position. And it's always very helpful in those situations if you can call upon, because obviously I'm not a climate scientist, so it's helpful if you can call upon the authority of someone who sounds like they really know what they're talking and saying, this is what the science says, this is what XYZ guy from NASA or the IPCC have said. And it is actually quite difficult to find anyone who said we actually have to go to net zero by 2030.
The problem with climate science, the margin of error is huge, because look, the planet's 5 billion years old, so nobody can definitively say what we have to do by when, because we could have a planet of 6 degrees warming within the next 100 years, or it could be the next 10,000 years.
So you could say that the analogy that one can use is that if you knew there was a 30% chance of your house burning down in the next 3 years, you'd pay quite a lot to fireproof it, even if there's a 70% chance that it won't burn down. So with global warming, it's similar in terms of people say, well, you can't be sure that you have to decarbonise by 2030 because we don't know that the ice caps will melt or whatever. And you say, well, if there's a 30% chance, surely that's a good enough reason to invest significant numbers and make a few sacrifices in the here and now.
The reality is also we do need some nation states leading on the issue, right, which is yet to happen. So if that can be Britain, great.
Yeah. No, the strongest argument for this ambitious climate policy as it exists here is that to say, why you want to leave. So even if IPCC of what is it? How many C's is there?
IPCC.
I added a C, didn't I? Yeah, IPCC. They've said, the world needs to go to carbon neutral by 2050, and the argument for why we should go first is partly a moral one. So it's to say that we industrialise first, so we have already pumped out a fair amount of carbon into the air. So there's a moral reason why we should make some sacrifices first. But the other one, and I think electorally the stronger one, and probably in terms of practically the stronger one, is the fact that if you go hard and fast and you try and, they call it like a moonshot, if you try and be incredibly ambitious and say we will try pretty hard to decarbonise the entire energy system by 2030, then that spurs on the kind of innovations that can then be basically exported around the world.
The thing is, there are other countries out there which could do it far easier than we could. So
because of the natural resources they have in terms of wind or sun.
We're a cold country. We have long winters, and so a country like Iceland is almost there anyway, because it's geothermal, it's large, more population. Malta is probably another one. Islands. There's no reason for islands now not to, islands with lots of exposure to solar energy. So it's weird that Britain would be potentially the first country to do it, because the economics of it aren't as strong here as they are elsewhere. But also what we have to remember is that renewables are getting cheaper every year. Already the cheapest source of energy today is onshore wind. We don't pursue it because of the sort of politics around NIMBYism and sort of public opposition to it. But by the early 2020s, actually offshore wind is going to be cheaper than anything else anyway. So it's good to get ahead of the curve here, because ultimately, the economics do add up, and it's going to mean cheaper bills for people, retrofitting homes to make them more energy efficient. We have 30,000 excess deaths a year in this country. That's basically pensioners dying in the cold, retrofitting their homes to address energy and fuel poverty. There's a lot of issues here which you can stack up on top of each other and make a really good case for rapid energy transition.
We're going to talk about some of the political reaction to the manifesto. I want to talk about one more element of it, my favourite retro element, which is the 100,000 new council houses. I think that's going to be a very easy sell on the doorstep. But first of all, you are watching Tiski Sauer, you're watching Novara Media. As you know, this organisation is only possible because of your kind support. If you are already a subscriber, thank you very much. You are what makes this possible. If not, please go to support.novaramedia.com and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. And if you already do that, consider giving us an election bonus so we can up our output up and until the 12th of December and beyond, of course. Like this video, share this video on Twitter and Facebook, and keep your comments coming. We'll go to your questions at the end.
Can I just say something here? Holly Tomlinson, I don't know if it's true or not, she says Costa Rica already gets all its electricity from renewables. Electricity and energy, obviously separate things. So by next year, Scotland hopes to get all of its electricity from renewables, which is amazing. Yeah, but electricity is not energy, right? Energy includes heating, cars.
How does Scotland deal with the intermittency problem, or do they just have so much wind that they...
I think so. Winds and hydroelectric.
Hydroelectric isn't intermittent, is it? Because the...
Well, it's all intermittent, but yeah, less so.
Yeah, but not really at all, right? Because a river always flows. I suppose you have high water seasons and low water. I don't know. I'm not a geographer.
In terms of where we are, the worst for intermittency is solar. I mean, wind is actually also pretty. In somewhere like in the northeast of Scotland, wind's pretty certain, sort of 10 months of the year. But yeah, hydroelectric and wind. They're going to be an energy superpower. We'll be importing energy from them if they declare independence.
Let's talk about the 100,000 new council houses a year by the end of Parliament. It's not necessarily a groundbreaking policy, but this is the one that I'm most excited about arguing for. It reminds me of the 2017 manifesto. So I think what made the 2017 manifesto so easy to argue for was that they were, historically common sense policies. They were policies that people are used to. People think, yeah, of course that makes sense. But they had been ruled out by, a political reality of there is no alternative, or a political discourse that says you can't have nice things. And then when the Labour Party come along and say, we can scrap tuition fees, obviously, we can build council homes. Obviously, people are like, yeah, that does make sense. But it does take quite a lot of political bravery to say that. And I think that's really what was the turning point of the 2017 general election, was that people saw the value in a left-led Labour Party because they saw that it was only someone like Jeremy Corbyn who was able to break through, I suppose you could call it capitalist realism or whatever, which says that you can't have the nice things that you once had. But it also wasn't difficult to understand. So if you explain to someone why council houses make sense, it's that the state currently is paying billions and billions of pounds in the form of a landlord subsidy, which is paying people or paying private landlords who pay, through the roof rents. It just makes no economic sense whatsoever. It's not an efficient way to house people. It's not good for local economies because you have people paying half of their incomes to a landlord who puts it in a bank account, potentially offshore. I mean, you have many landlords who don't put them offshore, but they'll definitely spend less of it than the renters. It's called the marginal propensity to consume. So if you have a lot of money, you save a lot of it. If you don't have much money, you spend a lot of it. So if you halve rents, for example, that would instantly, dramatically put loads of activity and money into local economies. If you build 100,000 new council houses, that's what we can see. And again, I mean, it's often true when people on the left or the Labour Party say these policies will pay for themselves because they will increase economic growth and that will increase tax revenues. And so even if there is an outlay on a particular policy at this point in time, say investment in green jobs and investment in green technologies, green cars, they'll say that will increase tax receipts in the future so that it will pay back for the initial investment. That's still kind of abstract. With council houses, it's not remotely abstract. You say it will pay for itself because people will pay rent over a period of time, which will ultimately pay off the fixed cost of building the goddamn thing.
Yeah,
it's so easy to explain, and it's so shocking that for the last 30 years, no one has been allowed to say this. Because it's just so obviously the most humane and rational way to organise a society.
Well, so Paul Mason, he did a great video for us, right? It's been on Facebook. You can check that out on the Novara Media YouTube channel. And he said, the household analogy of public spending and a credit card is, I mean, it makes sense, but like many analogies, not in a good way. And, a better analogy is a mortgage. And yes, for the average family, a £350,000 house is a lot of money, but you pay it over 25 years. And at the end of the 25 years, you have a house. And that's how we should look at the Green New Deal or building hundreds of thousands of council houses. And, most people go, yeah, mortgages are good. I'd rather be a homeowner with a mortgage than be a renter. So why would you rather be paying, classic example is with the broadband. The Tories want to pay billions of pounds for broadband. It's just for an inferior service with the money going to private companies. Labour wants to spend more on something that we own The revenues generated come to us, or not on the instance of broadband because it's free at the point of use. You know, that has a bunch of what we call positive externalities by economists. You know, it's just giving money away for an inferior service. So that you're right. Why do you think it wasn't challenged for 30 years? Because it's kind of nuts, right? Because it's patently a ridiculous way to run society.
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't happened everywhere. So in Vienna, I think about 80% of people live in social housing. So it's not one of those things where, I mean, I suppose there is the argument, there's the sort of functionalist argument that because of slower growth rates or post-industrialization, the profit for capitalists to continue making profit, you ended up having to expand the amount of rent in the economy, so the amount of money that people could make without really producing anything. I mean, I think potentially a stronger argument is just politics, right? So you had Margaret Thatcher, who in 1979 and onwards had a political reason to get rid of council housing because she thought that it created socialists, and people who lived in council housing had a material investment, but also an emotional investment in the social democratic state. She wanted instead to create a society of homeowners, people who were not so much invested in the maintenance of a well-funded welfare state, but rather invested in the values of the stock market, because that was where their personal wealth was determined.
And also there was the George Osborne quote, wasn't there, to Nick Clegg? Do you remember during the
why would we
coalition
build
years?
council houses? That's just Labour voters. And then you had, the only break you had from Conservative rule was New Labour, who were just terrified of challenging, I suppose, that particular consensus. So anything that looked like they were expanding the state, as opposed to just funding services which everyone could use, they were incredibly averse to. I can't think of any situation actually where they challenged vested interests when they thought that they could achieve a similar outcome in terms of utility maximisation.
Did they build anything which the Tories then privatised? There must be one or two. There were one or two things, I think.
I think New Labour built less council housing.
No, but I'm saying in terms of like new public utilities.
Oh, well, so New Labour were quite good, or one thing they were quite in favour of was the idea of increasing the standards of things in the public domain. So they saw that Margaret Thatcher, what she had done was really erode public spaces, parks, libraries, etc. So they pumped some money into
I don't mean that. I'm saying maybe the audience can be, they're watching this. So for instance, Labour auctioned off 3G spectrum, right? Mm-hmm. So that was something which was subject to the exact same logic we're talking about. Were there any new institutions that were created under New Labour which were subsequently privatised by the Tories? So there were a few privatisations under New Labour, Kinetic, BA systems, etc. But if anybody in the comments knows of any, I can't really think of anything, I think, that was privatised by the Tories which Labour set up.
Because the only thing that was privatised by the Tories was Royal Mail.
Which
obviously Labour didn't create.
I think the Green Investment
They
Bank.
might have created it
No, the
recently,
Green
I don't know.
Investment Bank. I think they privatised, right? The coalition privatised. In the late Brown years, a Green Investment Bank was set up, and I think that was privatised by the Tories and Lib Dems. Somebody in the comments can clarify.
So that was the one bit of rolling back of the state that the Tories did.
But even that
with
was Gordon
reference
Brown.
to New Labour
That was
or
Gordon
third
Brown.
way institutions.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the political reaction to the manifesto. It's obviously not going to be a surprise that the Conservatives attacked it, but it is kind of interesting the manner in which they did so. To launch this part of the conversation, I want to show a video of Boris Johnson. This is a pull clip for the BBC with his reaction to the Labour Party manifesto.
None of this has any economic credibility whatever. I mean, to say nothing of the ruinous characteristics of the policies, but none of it has any credibility whatever, because the hole at the heart of Labour's manifesto, this was the moment, it was lights, camera, action, Corbyn comes centre stage, drum roll, and he completely misses his cue. Because what we want to know is what is his plan to deliver Brexit, and what's the deal he wants to do, and which side would he vote on that deal, and we still don't know. Until we have answers to those questions, until we get Brexit done, none of this carries any economic credibility whatever. And I contrast our approach. We've got a deal ready to go. Put it in the oven. It's done. We're through by January. We get on with our ambitions for the country, uniting and levelling up. Look at what we want to do: 1 million new homes that we're planning to build, and we already did 1 million since 2010. We have fantastic ambitions for this country, cutting national insurance, as I explained yesterday, doing a lot to invest in our NHS, driving the economy, and we believe in a thriving business-led market economy that delivers the tax revenues that we need to pay for the biggest ever boost for the NHS in living memory, which is what we're also doing. So we've got a deal, we've got a plan.
I thought what was interesting about that response was how, in a way, tepid it was. So I think this is about two things, which is one, the extent to which Corbyn's Labour have transformed what is politically acceptable since 2017. So if if Ed Miliband had put forward this manifesto, the reaction to the leader of the Conservative Party, especially if they'd been of the hard right variety, such as Boris Johnson, would have been, to attack this as Marxist nonsense. It was going to turn the country into Venezuela, etc., etc. But Boris Johnson actually, unlike many people in his team or many people in the current cabinet, seems quite reluctant to get into an argument about levels of taxation and into an argument about how much we should fund public services or whether or not housing should be brought into the domain of the state. And I mean, you've got BBC commentators saying this is a manifesto that will increase the state to the size we haven't seen since Harold Wilson. So there'd be lots of things which you would expect the Conservative Party to be really, really pouncing on. And what's interesting there is that Boris Johnson doesn't want to have that argument. And I think he thinks he doesn't want to have that argument because he's not sure he can win it. And what you see instead in that video is that he is desperate to make this. He doesn't really want a general election. He wants a second Brexit referendum. So all he ever talks about, you saw it in the debate. We talked about it in the post-debate analysis on Novara Media, but he wanted to bring every topic back to Brexit because he wants to have a second Brexit referendum. And it does put Labour in a difficult situation. I mean, Boris Johnson recognises that the path to a Tory majority is via seats which they've called part of the Red Wall. So seats in Labour Leave areas. And he thinks that if he keeps off topics such as the NHS and such as investment, such as taxation levels, and makes this purely a second referendum, they have a chance of victory. And to be fair to him, we'll talk about how worried we should be. I know you've been taking a keen interest in polls over this election, Aaron, but in Great Grimsby, a Survation poll came up with some quite worrying results for the Labour Party. We can probably get this up. So the Conservatives are on 44%, according to Survation. That's up 2 points from 2017. The Labour Party are on 31%. That's down 18 points from 2017. And the Brexit Party are on 17 points, which is obviously plus 17 from 2017 because they weren't standing there. So, I mean, the most obvious way of looking at that is to say that the Brexit Party have taken 17 points off Labour and now the Conservatives are going to run
Grimsby
to
was
victory.
An ultra-marginal seat in 2017.
An ultra-marginal.
What was the majority?
But you only need to win, I don't have the majority in front of me now, you can look it up. But you only have to win a few of those. And the Conservatives are on their way.
No, because they're going to lose 7 seats in Scotland. They've got to win quite a few seats like that, realistically.
Okay, yeah, 15, 20.
Yeah, and that's for a tiny majority.
Mm-hmm. Is there a question, someone did ask it in the comments as well, actually. Does it matter how good Labour's manifesto is if actually what we're having is the Brexit referendum and because more seats voted Leave than Remain, and because to the extent to which this is a second Brexit referendum, the Conservatives, have a clear path to victory, potentially not a majority, but to being the largest party. How much does it matter what is in the Labour manifesto?
It does. I'm just looking at the last general election.
2,000 majority, apparently.
Yeah, it's 2,000 majority, but prior to that, it was a 5,000 majority in 2015, and in 2010, it was a 700 majority. So it's been on a knife edge for a long time. It's not one of these Labour safe seats, 25,000 majority, and then
Mm-hmm.
It's strange. And also, you have to remember Grimsby, former basically a fishing town, suffered massively because of the European fisheries sort of policy. So again, how typical is it? There will be seats like that, but also remember in 2017, you see maps where the vote went left or went right, went to Labour or went to Tory, and actually across most of the Midlands, even in 2017, when Labour saw their vote go up nationally by 10%, the Tory vote went, these places went Tory. Maybe they didn't turn blue, but the swing was to the Conservatives.
The swing was towards Conservatives.
Yeah, and you see that in Grimsby. So in 2017, the Tories got a 15% swing. The Labour Party got a 9% swing. So both picking up from UKIP, because obviously UKIP stood down. Well, sorry, no, they didn't. Mike Hookham actually stood there, the MEP who knocked out Stephen Wolfe in I think it was Strasbourg, maybe it was Brussels. So in terms of what the manifesto will do for someone like Grimsby, I don't know. Maybe the Tories will win Grimsby. I don't know. There's going to be lots of outlier seats. How typical is it? Again, I don't know. I think the line on the NHS and the line on Brexit, a Tory Brexit being a means basically to subordinate Britain to sort of a perfidious America, I think that's a narrative which can get through to Leave voters. Do we have time? I don't know. I'd also say that Jeremy Corbyn said it, I think, today, which is Boris Johnson's line of get Brexit done is complete bullshit. Peter Oborne was certainly saying it on Joe in the video response to the debate. He was saying it's just lies. We will have another couple of years of negotiation. A deal with the EU may take 3-4 years. Then you have to negotiate new trade agreements around the world. This is not the end of something. It's the beginning. And so if Labour can communicate that effectively to these seats, they may keep hold of them. We don't know. In 2010, we heard about how Labour would lose all these... And Labour in 2010 got 29% of the popular vote, and it was a hung parliament. And we were told that they were going to lose all these seats to the Tories, and they didn't. Now, it would be a cognitive bias for me to say that will just happen again, because I don't think that's true. But I think it's perfectly possible for Labour to pick up some strange seats, Kent, in the southeast of England, and then to lose somewhere like Grimsby. That's totally plausible. Right now, are the Tories looking at a big majority? Oh, God. We won't clip that one up for social media. Are the Tories looking at a big majority? No. I honestly don't think so. Somebody was saying, well, they can afford to be, what was the word you used? Sort of, Boris Johnson was kind of like low energy.
Tepid.
Somebody's saying, well, they can afford to be tepid because they're 15 points ahead in the polls. That's a Kantar poll, which is just the weighting on it is ridiculous. Realistically, the Tories are probably somewhere between 5 and 10 points ahead. And if the Tories go in with their own internal polling, if the Tories go into the final week of the general election 5 points ahead, they're going to be very, very worried. Mm-hmm. So if he's tepid, there's something wrong there. And I think it's exactly what you say. They know they can't fight this general election on the issues that Labour's going to try and put it on.
Boris Johnson isn't bothering really doing the sort of counterattack in terms of what Labour would do to the economy. As we just talked about, he's trying to make this into a second Brexit referendum. Incidentally, actually, I think the reason that is because it's a fact that in the 2017 general election, one thing that helped the Labour Party was that Leavers, there were 17 million Leavers in the 2016 referendum and 16 million Remainers, but then in the 2017 general election there was differential turnout. So there was only 14 million Remainers which turned out in 2017, and 13 million Leavers. So Leavers were much more likely to stay at home than what Boris Johnson will be hoping is that some of those people who voted Leave in 2016 became non-voters in 2017 will again become voters in 2019 for a Boris Johnson-style Brexit, which is precisely why the Labour Party need to go hard on the idea that a Boris Johnson Brexit is a Trump deal Brexit, and as we know, he is in negotiations, or there are trade negotiators who are discussing drug prices with American corporations. I don't think that can be said enough in this.
I think the
election.
Brexit referendum as well, that the Tories will be looking at, Dominic Cummings we don't know if Dominic Cummings, how involved he is in the campaign, right? But we know that the Leave campaign in 2016 spent a lot of money in the final 2 days on social media. You can only presume the Tories, all these millions of pounds they're getting right now, that's where it's going to go. So I think, things, for better or worse with Labour, I think things could move around a hell of a lot in the last week. So the idea that 3 weeks out Johnson is the way he is, I think is strange.
Let's talk about Tory fake news. So every electoral event in this general election calendar has come with it a piece of fake news from the Conservative Party. So obviously we saw during the debate, which we discussed on Tuesday, that the Conservatives changed their official press account to Fact Check UK. They pretended to be a fact checker. I think gladly this backfired on them. It was actually on, the 10 o'clock news. It was on all the bulletins which people watch who aren't necessarily engaged in politics, Twitter. So what the Tories were saying when they went on the TV was, this is a Westminster story, this is a Twitter story, people don't care. But people saw how dishonest that was when it was repeated on the 10 o'clock news. This manifesto release was no different. So what we saw from the Conservatives this time around was they registered a website called labourmanifesto.co.uk and then put up loads of advertising on various websites talking about how this was going to collapse the British economy. Obviously, Boris Johnson doesn't want to be saying these things, but the Tory party are doing the dirty work for him in often incredibly sneaky ways. The stunt on Tuesday, changing their Twitter to Fake News UK, I think backfired. What do you think about this website, labourmanifesto.co.uk?
I mean,
do you
it
think
may
this
be
could have
illegal.
any success for them?
I mean,
Would it be legal?
Well, because it's electoral fraud, right?
Well, it doesn't actually pretend to be the Labour Party, does it?
Well,
I mean, I suppose you
look
could
at
say
the URL.
the URL does pretend to be the Labour Party, yeah.
I mean, it's pretty fishy. I mean, it's obviously there's a debate to be had over it, right? I mean, I agree that it probably isn't. But
To be honest, it could be, because what people said about Dominic Cummings, so Dominic Cummings is obviously running this campaign, and what people said about
is he though? That's the thing. We don't know.
Okay,
There's
know
apparently
them.
these internal tensions between him and Linton Crosby and other people. We don't know.
But he's obviously involved.
Yeah.
And it was said, and I think it's plausible, that him, actually, and especially this applies to Aaron Banks, they had, even though they were competing in the vote leave side, but both used similar tactics at times, their policy was, be a bit relaxed about electoral law, just do it. Have a bias towards, if there's someone in the room saying, we're not sure if this is legally okay. This is the opposite to how anything works in the Labour Party, because the Labour Party are always very worried about getting sued because they know that there won't be buckets of money and they have to be a very long-term institution. So if they do get sued, it could cause problems. But Dominic Cummings and Aaron Banks were like, fuck it, this referendum will only happen once. We know that once the result comes in, it's going to be impossible for anyone to void the results, which, it is. And so they said, let's just go for it. Let's have a bias towards doing something, even if we're not sure whether or not it's illegal, which is clearly what the Conservatives are doing this time around. Presumably there was someone in the office who said, we're not precisely sure if it's legal to call a website labourmanifesto.co.uk. And someone else in the office was like, well, how long is that court case going to take to go through the courts? So I think, fuck it, we'll have a majority by then, if their strategy works. I mean...
And then
we can stop them achieving their goal.
Then you had Michael Gove today, the Channel 4 sort of news reporter, was saying, well, you've said it's 6 hospitals or 40, which one is it? And then Michael Gove was like, you're adopting a polemical style.
That was bananas.
This isn't but this is just like...
I think that probably backfired, that one. When they get held up, the only way this can bring them down is if it clogs up their media appearances on slots that people do actually watch. I suppose people don't watch Channel 4 news.
I think I price in the Tories getting 40% anyway, right? And so this is not them behaving like this. And this is where I probably would disagree with a lot of sort of centrist journalists. They think, they should be polling 25%. No, because they're leading a pro-Brexit coalition of people. You get higher turnout amongst older voters. They're going to get around 40%. They might get slightly lower. They might get slightly higher. The question is, if the SNP do very well in Scotland, which I think they will, we don't really know if it's possible to win a big majority in British politics now that the SNP wins in Scotland. Nobody's done it yet. So, Cameron, I think, got a majority of 15 in 2015. Boris might do that. Mm-hmm. He might do that. Is that a big enough sort of majority for what he wants to do politically? I doubt it, actually. How long would it last? Would they get a majority as big as 1992? I think it was 20 odd for Major that year. Maybe. How long did that last? Well, they lost that majority within about 18 months. So, Johnson has to win really, really big. And so I price in 40 as a low, but then this awful stuff they're doing, I mean, that's what I think is going to hold them back from getting much higher. But I don't think they're going to go below that. I don't think they're going to go below 40 because of this nonsense. But are you concerned about how comfortable they are with like stuff that would make Trump blush?
Only if it works. So, I mean, I'm not one of those people who's particularly, concerned about how have they lost. At least we used to have elections in a way where people were dignified and respected the rules. I'm not particularly worried that, norms and conventions are being broken. My concern is if the reason they're doing it is because they think it will work. And I think that has a lot to do with advertising. So even if, it plays badly in the political press, if they are pushing advertising to the constituencies precisely where it matters, they might think a bit of flack in terms of people calling us the party of fake news is worth it if it is swinging those particular marginals. And obviously when it comes to online advertising, there is less rebuttal, as it were. It's difficult to rebut an online
advert. Do you not think
advert.
we're getting to a point where I have zero faith in the media in this country, as people are probably already aware. But do you not think we're getting to a point quite quickly where broadcast media doesn't actually like them very much? And that's an issue because if the broadcast media doesn't like you and they want to sink you, I mean, that's a big variable, both during but also after the general election.
Well, I think the Conservatives are going to be pretty goddamn confident that the broadcast media is not going to try and bring down the current Conservative Party, given that they know who the opposition are and how the Labour leadership challenges the establishment, and many people within the broadcast media, and especially within the newspapers, the broadcast media often responds to and bounces off. So I don't think they would be particularly worried about that.
The BBC.
I think what is possible is that, I mean, I suppose my worry is that they're clearly having some misses when it comes to this fake news shit. So their Fact Check UK, I can't see how the benefits outweigh the negatives there. It was a Twitter account. No one who's particularly within their target constituencies is going to be, following the CCHQ Twitter account. So all that was a bad news story with, I can't see any benefit. My worry is that they're throwing so much shit at the wall, and some of it's fucking up and creating a bad headline, and some of it's working by, selling a lie to their target constituents, which may be electorally helpful to them. Let's just go through 2 more examples of Tory fake news, because it's a habit now, isn't it? So Matt Hancock today on Twitter, his response to the manifesto: shocking, this Labour manifesto, £80 billion tax rises, £2,400 for every worker. Britain can't afford the cost of Corbyn. The reason this is clearly fake news is because the guy doesn't understand, I suppose, maths or how tax works. So what he has done is taken the legitimate £82 billion price tag on the Labour manifesto, which will be paid for via taxation, but as the Labour Party say, it will be paid on via taxation for the top 5% for corporations, and in terms of a gift tax, inheritance, and the like. It is not going to be divided equally among every household in Britain, which is what Matt Hancock has done. You don't have to be an economist to work out that's complete bullshit. Again, I'm not actually sure what the point of doing this on Twitter is, because that's not a lie which is targeted towards his, swing voters, swing demographic. One more piece of fake news. Again, I think this one backfired for the Conservatives. Thankfully, this is Priti Patel. This was yesterday. She was saying that the government is not to blame for poverty, blamed local authorities, and I think the implication was kind of individuals and families, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Let's go to that video now.
4 out of 10 children in parts of Barrow are born into poverty. That's not good enough, is it?
Well, it's appalling. And of course, but everybody, and it's not just people in Westminster, it's not just at a national level, it's at a local level through the
It's the government, and you've had nearly 10 years.
Well, it's not the government, though, is it? I mean, everybody just says it's the government, as if it's this sort of like bland blob that, you can just go and blame.
So the government's not responsible for poverty?
It's not, because it's all parts of society and the structures. Local authorities have a role to play, education, public services, which are locally led and locally run.
Oh, are we on now? Great. We don't have the screen today, so sometimes I'm not precisely sure when we're going to come back. I mean, that to me looked like a fuck up. She's in Barrow, so it is a marginal target constituency. To be honest, I think actually average wages there aren't that low, because they have the
BAE are there, right?
BAE are there, so you've got some quite high skilled jobs, but at the same time it's a constituency which has a lot of deprivation, and she has gone there and said, yeah, it's got nothing to do with the government if people are in poverty. She blames local authorities, which is, I mean, frankly bonkers, because the Conservatives have cut the budgets for local authorities by up to 70% since 2010. So the idea she can blame this on local authorities, I mean, that is taking the electorate to be, so stupid that it's so transparent and absolute bullshit, to be honest. There was, the beginnings of a bit of a backlash against the BBC this morning as well, because that video initially went viral. I think 1 million people had watched it after it was tweeted by BBC Northwest. Everyone was quote tweeting it, and as it happens, you quote tweet it, a bunch of people retweet it, and they're like, the video's disappeared. So people thought the BBC had taken it down on the behest of the Conservative Party.
Totally believable.
I mean, potentially they had. The official story was that they'd slightly misquoted her, so they had to delete it and re-upload it with a different caption. But it did mean that a video that would have been in millions of people's feeds was suddenly no longer available.
Yeah.
But in any case, that looked like a fuck up to me. Let's go to questions in a moment. But first of all, you want to talk about what the Lib Dems have been up to. I know you've been keeping a keen eye on them over this general election.
I mean, we know that the Tories are scumbags. We know that. But I remember a time in the mid-2000s when the Lib Dems were just sort of vanilla, quite progressive, nice guys. Anti-war, led by Charlie Kennedy, wanted to scrap tuition fees. But now they've become a rabid alt-centrist mockery, really. They're kind of like the fever dream of J.K. Rowling and Alistair Campbell on acid. So maybe we can go to this puppet video. Can you see this, folks? The puppet video. It's in the document. This was put out today by Lib Dem press office. I think so far it's had about 4,000 replies and it's had about 220 retweets, but probably tells you something about its success. So yeah, let's have a look at that.
Back to us? Yeah. Don't worry about it. We can't show it, right? You have to give the videos in advance.
The doc.
Yeah, but you have to give them in advance now because he downloads them and then he puts them up. That's why the transitions between us talking and the videos are incredibly smooth at the moment. And the reason is that Fox, our new producer, he downloads the videos.
Right.
And then when I cue them, he shows a downloaded video. Aaron obviously has arrived 20 minutes before the show and has put it in the doc.
Half an hour
and he
before
thinks
the show.
that you're going to be able to watch that video. Oh, you are watching it now. I'm talking to no one. Oh, they are watching it now. Oh, it's with me now, is it? Okay. Sorry, that wasn't the smoothest transition ever.
Well, we don't know what people have heard, but people saw the video?
People saw the video, so you talk about the video.
Did they hear the video?
While Aaron's talking about the video,
Right.
you put in your questions. I'm going to start collecting your questions.
Yeah, the puppet video, somebody's quoted here, is absolutely bizarre. It was just really, who thinks this is a good idea? It's a bit like they had that, remember that skeleton of, or that spine, and they're like Jeremy Corbyn's spine last seen, and they were taking pictures of it and putting it on Twitter, and it's like, who the fuck are these people? Look, here's my bet. The Lib Dems are going to lose seats. They've got 21 at the moment. They're going to lose seats.
Oh, they will lose seats because they didn't win the seats in the first place.
No, I know, but they were polling 20 plus like 5-6 months ago. This shows you the value of, people are saying, well, in the European elections, we did this. In the European elections, the Brexit Party came first. The Lib Dems came second. The Brexit Party were polling 30-odd% in national polls for Westminster. The Lib Dems were polling 25%. Between them, they're going to get, how much? 12, 13%, 14%. I'd love the Lib Dems to get below 10%. I would love it. Because, we saw Red David, and we probably can't show that for reasons I said. Or can we show that?
No, let's not show any more videos because, to be honest...
Fox is putting his thumb up.
Yeah, but that video people didn't see. People were like, we couldn't hear it. Some people couldn't see it.
Right. Can we hear the Ed Davey one, Fox?
We're going to have Ed Davey ready to go, yeah.
Let's do it. Let's watch Davey. Give me a shout when we can do it. Because this is really important, Michael, and it'll be one for the questions, which
well, if it was important, you should have put it in the script a little bit
your
earlier so it
workflow.
could have been downloaded. Yeah?
I didn't know the Walker workflow. The professional Walker workflow.
Yeah, are we on now? Can we show it now?
Let's roll.
All right, let's go to some questions.
I'll ventriloquise what he said.
Okay, go on.
Which is, we would support a Tory government if it meant we could have a referendum on their deal, which is ridiculous. We're going to stop Brexit by supporting a Tory government.
The other thing she said was, this question is, would you press the nuclear button? I suppose this is directed at us. I wouldn't press the nuclear button. Although, to be honest, if I was running for Prime Minister, I would just say, I'm not going to answer that question. It's a ridiculous question, and be quite disciplined about that. Labour, I had got into a sort of small argument on Twitter about this the other day because it was when Emily Thornberry had got into a bit of a pickle on GMTV when it came to her question about would or would not Jeremy Corbyn press the nuclear button. She sort of said, who knows? It got made into an attack video. I think
I didn't see that.
What you have to do, it's not going to swing the election, is it? But given that, as we said at the beginning of the show, Labour Party policy is to renew Trident, I personally think that it wouldn't be particularly coherent to say we would never press the nuclear button. So I think you should just say that's a ridiculous question to ask. We are not going to answer that. The whole point of the nuclear deterrent isn't that you say, oh, I'd love to press the red button and nuke someone. We're renewing it because we're currently... the party decision is that we're going to maintain the deterrent, but it would be unprofessional of me. It would be unstatesmanlike of me to say whether or not I would press it.
Also, you have to take advice from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, all sorts of things. It's not just... Heaven help us if it's Joe Swinson and it's like, oh, I'm going to press the big red button to fucking nuke somebody. Because the only time you'd ever use nuclear weapons is if you're under attack from a nuclear power, at which point it's all over. or rather, that's the only morally legitimate use of nuclear weapons, right?
Well, I don't think there is a morally legitimate
you
use
can't
of
use nuclear weapons on a
but-
country which doesn't have nuclear weapons, right? That's
I know you
obviously-
shouldn't really use it on any. I mean, there's just so much innocent death from using a nuclear
No,
weapon.
no,
But at the same
we
time,
agree.
that doesn't mean that you should answer, "Oh, I wouldn't use it."
We-
if you're
we-
going to renew it, it's incoherent.
We agree, but the whole point is, and also look, the big security threats of the 21st century are a dirty bomb used by a proxy with like plausible deniability from a major power, or bioweapons which are created at very low cost because of gene editing. That's the stuff we should be really, not really worried about, quite worried about. It's far more of a threat than Russia nuking us and Joe Swinson being on the other side. Believe me, if Joe Swinson's responding to fucking Russian ICBMs, it's already over. Good night.
Did you see her answer?
Yeah, I
think
did.
that was a reference to her saying when she was asked, "Would you press the red nuclear button or whatever?" And she was like, "Yes."
She said yes before they'd finished the question.
Yeah.
She couldn't say yes.
And then the
quickly
question was
enough.
like, "That was a brilliant, simple answer. Thank you." But I don't think many people will be particularly
It
impressed by
wouldn't.
that.
It would be down to the MOD and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Believe me, a civilian politician. You know, the only one that's ever done it in human history was a president in the Second World War. Was it Harry Truman or
It would have been.
was 45?
Yeah, it was Harry Truman. Because
So-
Roosevelt died in between
Yeah.
Potsdam and Yalta,
Yeah.
didn't he? Or whichever way around
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah. So, you know, we haven't really got a big sample to say, well, this is what civilian politicians do when confronted with these challenges. It's fucking nonsense. It speaks to the vacuity of the entire political debate in this country.
Goffmorgz asked, "Does Labour need the SNP, and what price would we pay to get their support?" They quite possibly would. It probably is quite unlikely that the Labour Party will get a majority at this election. You know, it's not impossible, but it's not up there in the most likely outcomes, which would mean there would probably be some form of minority government. To be honest, I think the Labour Party would be in quite a strong position to play hardball. I don't think it would look particularly good for the SNP to enable a Boris Johnson government and bring about a hard Brexit because they were belligerent in their desire to have a second referendum, in any kind of coalition or confidence and supply agreement. To be honest, I feel like the Labour Party have made this more of an issue than they needed to by sort of saying, I think they should have just said Scotland can't have a referendum in the next Parliament. I don't, you can always change your position. Well, I suppose if you
It's
say
not up to them, though,
you
is
say
it?
categorically you can't. Well, it is up to them.
Well, it's not up to them.
Well, it's up to the government in London whether or not Scotland.
No,
have a
but then they can
referendum.
just have an unofficial one, and that creates like the politics ultimately of independence aren't stopped by a central government saying you can't. Look at the Catalonia crisis.
Yeah, I mean,
they
I
had
think
an unofficial referendum.
yeah.
It's still it's still an issue.
I think, frankly, that Scotland should be able to have a referendum if they want one. I think that Labour's policy on this has been, a bit all over the place. In Scotland, they've been like, we'll never enable a second referendum. In London, they've been like, yeah, maybe we would, but not in the first year. And I think that has become a little bit of a weakness. But I don't
Also,
think it
it's
will swing
crazy
the
because
election.
we'd have a second European referendum in the first year. You can't. I mean, it's just nuts.
Ben Crawford, should Caroline Lucas get a cabinet position in a minority government? I'd be up for it.
If she joins Labour, the Greens are. I'm sorry, the Greens. The way they behaved in the last few weeks, they're a fucking basket case.
I'd let her.
Molly
I'd let her in if she was-
Cato. What's her name? Molly Cato.
I can't remember what her full name is.
She's like a proper alt-centrist.
She's an MEP, isn't
she's
she?
odd.
The Jeremy Gilbert line, he's been quite vocal on Twitter about this, which I think is quite interesting, is that the reason, and I don't entirely agree with it, but I do think there's something to it. He says that the reason that the Greens have gone so, I suppose, centrist or sort of are lashing out is because they were actually quite good in the 2017 manifesto in that they stood down in a number of seats, which did help Labour win in certain remaining areas. It might not have swung it significantly, but it helped, and they didn't get that much in return, as it were. So now
They've won
they're
one
lashing
seat
out.
in 40 years. What do you want?
Well-
Labour, the only party Labour needs to treat as an equal. First of all, the Lib Dems are
You don't have to treat them as an equal, do you?
The Lib Dems are Tories. The Greens aren't a real party. I was in the Greens. I voted for them in 2015. The Greens aren't a real party. The only party they should treat with respect in terms of like what Jeremy Gilbert's talking about is the SNP. They're a big party.
Well, you can treat people with respect without saying that they're an equal party. You can say so. I mean, with
No,
the
but they
Greens,
said that-
with the
the
Greens,
Green-
you can say we're going to stand down in. I mean, the Labour Party, for example. I think there's only one seat where the Greens are ahead of Labour that isn't a Labour Green marginal. There's no point in standing down a Labour Green marginal, which is the Isle of Wight. So I mean, you can just say you can have the Isle of
Labour ahead of the Greens there.
They're ahead of the Greens.
They're second there.
Why is it always the Isle of Wight that the Greens?
Well, because
bring
that's
up?
what I'm saying. There's no argument.
But if you
There's
say
no
you can have one constituency which Labour aren't going to win anywhere, if you stand down in all marginals, it's a
No,
decent.
but there's no seats
it's a
where the
decent
Greens are
deal,
second
isn't
and
it?
Labour are third. There are no seats. There are no seats.
But then
they go Bristol West.
But
Labour,
then their response is going to be, well, if
It's a Labour seat.
if your reason for not giving us a deal is because we're not second anywhere, then your request for us to stand down anywhere where we're
I'm not saying they should
third
stand
is-
down. I'm saying that the things that Molly Cato Smith lady is saying, are she spreads nonsense on Twitter which isn't true about Labour policy, and you can do that. That's
Molly
fine.
Scott Cato.
Molly
someone
Scott
is-
Cato. You can do that. That's fine. But when they're actually pressing home really good radical green policy, I find that kind of weird. I think, why are you in politics?
Don't Trust Them said, would the increase in votes from 16 to 17-year-olds and non-UK nationals allow Labour to win again in 5 years without Scotland as part of the Union? Quite possibly. I haven't seen any specific social scientific data on this, but I mean, it seems plausible to me that could radically transform the electoral map of Britain if you allowed 16 to 17-year-olds to vote and non-UK nationals.
So I think you're adding about 6-7 million people, aren't you? Somebody's saying, Aaron, chill out about the Greens.
I kind of agree. Chill out about the Greens.
Go to the Green Manifesto and Control F nationalisation, Control F public ownership, Control F trade unions. You're not going to find anything.
This is an interesting question. I don't know the answer. I wonder if you will, Aaron. The best time to invest in the pound. Should I hold on to my leftover holiday money? Is the pound going to go up or down in the next 6 months?
I mean, who knows? Well, it depends, doesn't it? If we have a second referendum, and we remain, it's going to recover slightly.
It's going to go up.
But then if we remain and Scotland leaves the Union, there's a lot of variables, a lot of moving parts here. We're leaving the world's largest economic...
We're not currency traders for a reason.
Well, no, but there's a lot of risks, right? So a lot of room for volatility either way. We could potentially be leaving the world's largest economic market. You could potentially see the demise of the British Union. You could potentially see the election of a socialist as prime minister. So all these moving parts, really, we can't really give you a conclusive answer, I'm afraid.
I actually haven't read that part of the manifesto in enough detail. Are Labour not going to close the detention centres? Are Labour closing all detention centres?
Yes, that's in the manifesto.
All of them?
That's in the manifesto.
Great.
I mean, I think maybe I've misread it. I saw closure of detention. Somebody can put it in the comments. That's what I read.
Final question. Favourite new celebrity Labour supporter on Twitter? Paul Creaney is tempted by Alan Moore, but I'm sticking with Bill Oddie.
Go on. Who do you think?
I mean, I was going to go Bill Oddie, but he's already introduced it. I'm trying to think what other new celebrity Labour supporters
There's a new guy
have there been
following
on Twitter?
us. Miltos Yerolamu.
Who's that?
Who plays Syrio Forel in Game of Thrones? The sword.
Oh, sick.
The guy who teaches, what's her name, how to sword fight.
I've only ever watched one episode of Game of Thrones.
Not
not
Sansa
good, is
Stark,
it?
the other one. The other young Stark
Well, I'm not going
sister.
to. I've only watched one episode, so I'm not going to be able to tell you the answer.
Anyway, the guy who taught her sword fighting is...
Wiley. I don't know if Wiley coming out in favour of Labour is new or old, but it's happened in the last 2 weeks, and I'm into that.
Yeah, well, this guy's on Game of Thrones, and he's now following Novara Media, and he's like bigging up Labour.
Very good.
Which is pretty sick.
Let's end there, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for watching this episode of Tiski Sour. We will be back, I think, very early next week. As you know, Novara Media, Tiski Sour is only possible because of your kind support. So if you are already a subscriber, thank you very much. If not, please go to support.novaramedia.com and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. Or if you already do, think about giving us an election bonus. Like this on Facebook, like it on Twitter. As ever, we love your comments. Aaron Bastani, thank you so much for joining me this evening.
My pleasure. Arya Stark, people are now saying in the comments. Thank you.
Good night.